Well, hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Certified Forgotten. We're still, and always the show that talks about horror films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. It gets easier to do the farther back we go in time, and that's a little bit of a precursor to the conversation we're going to have today about an 80s film that I know Donato has been itching to have on the podcast for a very, very long time. Isn't that right, Donato?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, I saw Rawhead Rex a while ago. It is one of those. They don't make them like this anymore, and I'm not saying that's always a great thing with Rawhead Rex, but at the same time, goddamn, we're going to talk about some creatures, and I love talking about creatures on this podcast.
I love talking about Irish horror film. I love talking about Clive Barker. Does that mean I'm going to love talking about Rawhead Rex?
I'm so fucking curious because I know your sensibility for horror, and Rawhead feels like more of a quote-unquote Donato movie if you've been listening to the podcast. But I don't know. I think this is the intersection of midnight movie and fucking Irish folkloric horror that I'm hoping is both of our tastes. I'm curious.
We'll see. But we didn't pick Rawhead Rex. We have an awesome guest, somebody whose career that you and I have been following for a really long time, that is here to talk about his own work as well as the movie in question. So, Donato, introductions, please.
Absolutely. We are talking to a filmmaker today that, as Monagle said, we have both been following for a little bit. Monagle was lucky enough to do a Film School Rejects piece on The Headhunter, if we're going to give away the name already. But I'm more excited to talk turkey with Jordan Downey, director of ThanksKilling, but also VHS Beyond, most prominently, which fantastic work with Storks.
Thank you, guys.
So, Jordan, we always start with asking our guests kind of their earliest connection to the horror genre. And this is because I've seen a lot of your movies. I'm very curious what those formative memories are, because I feel like it's going to be something kind of like goopy and gory maybe, but there's also a chance you could surprise me and go with something very moody and slow.
I mean, my memories, I suppose, are different than what I have seen photos of, like, and knowing that, like, I was drawn towards. So, like, for instance, there's a picture I have of my dad holding me, and I was under 4. And I don't remember this other than the photograph. But there was this, I'm from Ohio, and COSI is kind of like a science museum that's in Columbus. And they had an exhibit on movie props at some point in time. And Aliens, I was born in 1986, the year Aliens came out. Aliens was having like a traveling exhibit. And there's this photo of my dad holding me, and they're all posing, looking at the camera. And my head is completely turned 180 to looking at the power loader prop from Aliens. And so, I mean, I was drawn to monsters and science fiction, and in that case, sci-fi tech, as early as possible. I mean, my older brother kept this like records book kind of like movie posters and movie tickets that he was going to the theater. And they were the old stub style tickets that, looked a lot more cool than they do now. But he would write down like kind of little journal entries of like who he went and saw the movie with. And I had only really started to look at this when I was older, but I was going to like Alien 3 and stuff when I was 4 or 5 years old, and they were taking me to radar movies in theaters. And he had a big VHS video collection, so I was always looking at the covers and the artwork for those. So I was just as much a part of my life, I suppose, as anything, honestly. Monsters, Critters, if you guys have, read about my fondness for that movie, that's the one that is, I guess, categorized more in the icky, campy side of things. That's the one that I think I kind of really remember gravitating towards being obsessed with those films, even though the other experiences I don't remember, but clearly there's evidence to suggest I was going through them.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of practical effects in your films. Practical effects can mean a lot of things, right? It can mean blood versus CGI blood. It can mean, really fleshed out locations. I've always been struck by the work that you do with props. And when you mentioned the power loader suit, did you find yourself like creating stuff at a young age? Was it always kind of part of your process of creation that you would have these like things that you can hold and touch and feel and kind of play with?
Yeah, I mean, Planet Hollywood was like my favorite restaurant in the world to visit because I was obsessed with props. I've always been obsessed with movie props. As soon as really the internet became formative and eBay was around, I would go on eBay and just search screen used prop just to see what stuff looked like. And even to this day, if there's a prop somewhere, if there's a museum or any kind of display in the lobby of a movie theater, I'll stop and just stare at that thing, the costume, for so long, to just look at the craftsmanship, I suppose, on display, and sometimes how chintzy and cheap they actually are to the naked eye, but how great they look on camera when lit properly. So yes, I've always been obsessed with movie props and the construction of them, and then yeah, go figure, like I also was like obsessed with Legos as a kid and creating things. So whether it was building anything construction wise as cheap and childish as birdhouses to, play forts, or just anything like that, using saws and things at a young age as a kid, but also with Legos. And I would notice that, like, because I was just thinking about this actually recently, that obviously you'd buy the Lego sets that have the instructions, and I would build whatever it is that I bought, but then at some point I would crash it or destroy it, and then all those Legos would just get dumped into a big plastic bin, and they would just be, so now you've got 100 Lego sets that are just a giant collage of a big mess. And I would just dump them out and then invent stuff from scratch. So I kind of would build the thing that you were supposed to build and then destroy it and then create something. So
Yeah.
yeah, for whatever reason, like I've always been into, I guess, tangible, physical things, and just creating things with your hands.
So speaking to the child within you, I mean, and keeping with the practical conversation, how fun was it, and like what was lit inside of you when you got to make your little Critters film, Critters Bounty Hunter, and it looks exactly like it belongs in the franchise. Like, I mean, we'll call it a fan film, obviously, but it's
Right.
not. Like, it's fucking canon. It looks just as good as anything they've ever put out. So, like, what did that feel like as again the kid inside playing with fucking critters?
Thank you. I mean, I look, making movies is hard. I wish I could stop and, I guess, just be that kid. Sometimes people have to tell me to do that, or I have to literally stop myself to do it, because you're so inundated with just how do you pull this off, and all the minutia of, like, getting the stuff to look right and for you to be happy with it. So it's been more, I suppose, enjoyable to look back at it after it's been done and after it started to circulate the internet than it was during the actual making of it. But certainly putting fur on a basketball and rolling that thing across the living room to get those shots was a lot of fun, because I also knew that, like, that's all they had to make the Critters films with. I wasn't necessarily, my cheap version of some of that stuff wasn't really any different than what they were doing in 1986 and 88 and the 90s for 3 and 4. And so yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I mean, they were making the Critters web series, or something had come out at the time, and so me making that short film was to try and pitch for me to get the directing job to go and do one of the things that they were doing, which didn't obviously lead to that, but it did give me a chance to make something that, to this day, I'm super proud of it, because I think it is, I guess, everything that I would have wanted out of seeing Critters in 2015, whatever it was that we made that at this point.
And as you've kind of moved through your career, and you have the first and the third ThanksKilling movie, but not the second,
Hmm.
famously. You have the Headhunter. How have you found yourself still continuing to embrace that play, I guess, to like go after these big ideas that you have, these huge immersive worlds that you and your collaborators create on screen, and doing that, knowing that you operate often with the catering budget of like a mid-sized movie, right? Like
Yeah.
pure passion, pure effort kind of stuff. How do you maintain that kind of film after film?
Yeah, I mean, the gatekeeping of is something I've never, I just don't like waiting for permission. And we probably talked about that, years ago when we talked about the Headhunter, is just that I love movies. I love making movies. That's all I know how to do. That's all I want to do. And I don't want to ask for anyone to, say when that I'm allowed to do that thing. But I also, on the other side of that, love world building, and I just find myself drawn towards things that existed prior to the first frame and after the final frame. Just big ideas. It doesn't mean that it has to be a big movie. I think that's where a lot of things go wrong. Actually, is small ideas in giant worlds are way more interesting to me a lot of times than the opposite. But um, So I guess it really just comes down to like, I don't really want to choose the path of a career where I'm going to just make smaller projects and hope to build up to some sort of a bigger budget where the really then the scope can expand. Instead, I just try to achieve that now as much as possible. And I don't know. It's just, I guess it's just a combination of myself and Kevin Stewart, who I've written everything with, and who's also been the cinematographer on all our films together, being very careful and selective about how we shoot these props and costumes and sets, which is ultimately and practical creatures, which are really the things that tend to look the most low budget, or that's where the budget really shows. And it's just being very careful about how to shoot that stuff, I guess, specifically.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a meticulous way to the way you do that, and that is why I'm always drawn to your work. And like the way I kind of usually explain your work to my friends and stuff is using the allegory of Dan Trachtenberg, and just in the way that Portal was just fucking beautiful. Like he made such a great short with Portal, and what you're able to do on such a small budgetary scope, obviously compared to the big Hollywood studios and stuff like that, is just unmatched. Like, you know, you're doing things with the Headhunter that look like fucking Skyrim level, you know, if you were ever to adapt that into an actual movie. Or just the ThanksKilling films, are they fun slashers? Does the third one go fucking bonkers into Puppet World? Yeah, but they're all so unique, and I don't, you know, I don't see a lot of that right now. So it is such a testament to the way that you look at films and that the way that you build the world around them, because so many people don't think of that. And I'm watching your movies, and again, like in fucking Critters Bounty Hunter, I get more Critters lore than I got in the last like 5 movies.
I feel like that probably you would see other people having, achieving what you're describing if they tried, truthfully. Like, I think a lot of people just avoid puppets and practical creatures and worlds and sets like that that are certainly very capable filmmakers. They just don't try because they're probably nervous that it won't look good. And in some ways, a blessing and a curse of us making ThanksKilling at such a young age, and as my first feature as a director, was because it is notoriously cheesy and campy and low budgety. Is that in a way, I guess maybe I'm not as afraid to like get down and dirty with, like, if a puppet or something doesn't look quite right, like it doesn't really scare me because that's where I came from, and I know that, like, yeah, well, that's fine. There's, as we'll get into with Rawhead Rex, there is a charm to rubber. And some of us get scared by that, and other people like that. And I want to try and find the classy version of doing that stuff. But yeah, it's really just being selective about what you shoot and how you shoot it. And if you guys saw the raw footage of all these projects you're talking about in Headhunter and VHS, there's all kinds of stuff in there, just like there would be for any big monster movie that you would want to throw away and that you would never want to see the light of day. It's just about picking what little pieces you do see, and when does that mask or when did that prop hold up, and when does it start to not look right. And I don't know where that comes from, other than I suppose just watching a lot of monster movies and looking at a lot of props, and certainly having Kevin to help with that and to light these things and make them look really good on camera.
Yeah, and you mentioned VHS Beyond. I want to ask you about that process too, because you and Kevin directed Stork, which is the first of the films that shows in the anthology film. They don't show you the order; they don't do title cards in the movie. So I remember watching it and being like, "Oh, I wonder who's movie. Oh, this is Jordan Downey's film." Like 5 minutes in, I was like, "Nope, I know which one this is. The others might be confusing to me, but this one I have." So, what is it like to be brought onto a project like that? And given kind of what I would think would be a nice balance of, open endedness and restriction, you kind of have like bumpers that you're supposed to operate in within the broader theme of the VHS Beyond and what they were trying to accomplish. But there's also a lot of space for you to do kind of whatever the hell you want. So,
Mm-hmm.
where did Stork kind of come from in that creative balance for you?
That was a dream because I've been a fan of the VHS films for a while. And when I saw 94, whenever that it came out a few years ago, I remember just thinking, oh my God, I'd love to do one of these because there was so much creativity in all of those segments. And you could tell, like you're describing, is that there are rules you're playing by because it's found footage and it's a franchise now that's kind of established of how it works. But also, some of the most creative, original ideas that I'd seen in horror films in years were all contained to those short films. So I just thought, like, wow, there's, the sky's the limit, and this is the perfect kind of thing that I would be good at. So it took a few films to luck my way into that, into getting, that job. But Stork specifically came from artwork that it's based on by a Russian artist named Oleg Dovinko, who I've been a huge fan of for years. And I had written him about other things, just kind of trying to, like, make contact with him just because I was just such a fan of his work. And when I got the opportunity to pitch for VHS, then I asked him, hey, could I throw Stork into the mix? And that was this series of images that I had loved. And it was just basically what the short film has become, a team of cops that seem kind of ragtag and kind of, flying under the radar, going into a house to take out zombies. And then it becomes something more. And he was like, yes. And they chose that one. And I wasn't expecting that. So that balance, I think, is, well, like you said, is that there were really no restrictions. Like Josh and the producers and Shudder and everybody involved with VHS were incredibly supportive of that idea. And I knew that too, if you choose that idea, if you're going to go with cops blasting their way through a house, video game aesthetic to how we would shoot it, and they end up in the attic to fight a stork, that you're going to probably have a pretty open mind about, like, whatever else I'm going to, like, throw at you about how we should shoot this film. But knowing that it was also part 7 is kind of a weird balance, because on one hand it's established that it's found footage. You usually explain why the camera's being brought into some new situation in the beginning. You set up the character. It's kind of got a structure and a pace to it. But on the other hand, you're part 7, so you kind of got to do something maybe that, freshens things up, or to try and break the rules a little bit. So yeah, I didn't think too much about the rules of it, honestly. Like, really, there were very little restrictions or anything other than, like, literally the frame rate. Make sure you guys shoot it 24 frames per second and not 30. Let's not do it make sure it's in color. Other than that, like, there was very few script notes and very few notes on the edit. And away we went. Pretty free to just do what we wanted to do.
Yeah, hilariously, I was drinking Friday night with Josh, and we were talking about VHS and beyond, and just you talking about how you approach world building is so funny, and it makes so much more sense now. Because Josh, to your credit, he's like, dude, Jordan came with like an entire Bible for Stork. Like he had a whole world fleshed out right from the short, and he's like, nobody does that on these movies. Like, it's a short, it's an anthology series, so it's like a small thing. And he's like, fucking Downey made it a fucking dream. He's like, what the hell? He came with a whole Bible for Stork. And I was like, yeah, that fucking tracks.
That's nice of him to say that. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a, like, all or nothing kind of person. So, like, if there's something that I want to do, I'm all in on it, even if it is a pitch for something. And that's as far as making sizzle reels and cutting together trailers for the movie, that making pitch decks, coffee table books. I've kind of done it all. And for VHS, I really, really wanted the job. I really wanted to do one. So I gave Josh 5 different ideas. They weren't fully fleshed out, but there were like 5 ideas that each one of them could have made a cool short. And Stork was one of them. And there was another one that was all about, all told through the perspective of a chainsaw entirely. The whole thing was a chainsaw camera. And Josh was like, well, that was awesome. And I was like, okay, he responded to that. What if we get the chainsaw cam into Stork and kind of combine the 2 ideas? So that's where that came from. But then once we had it, I took probably what Josh is thinking of, if not that original pitch deck, is that then I took Oleg's original artwork and basically, like, did a side by side of just, I analyzed everything that was in the picture. Just like, this guy's drinking coffee. Why is he drinking coffee? So every single thing that he drew in there, I wrote down, and some of those notes then became things that we applied in the story, or I would then write Oleg and be like, hey, why do they have bandages on their forehead? Because it's never really explained in the artwork. And he was like, oh, I don't know, it was a dumb idea. I was like, it's not a dumb idea. What if this bird is slurping their brains out? And so yeah, we we had made a whole world, and then Warden the cops was just our doing, because again, the world building and just, well, who is this police task force? And if they're killing the stork, they've done this before and they'll do this again. So just trying to, again, like mentioning earlier, like make sure that there are things that have happened before and after what you watch.
Feels very Resident Evil as like I'm going through
Yeah.
it. Like that was my big takeaway walking out of the theater. I was like, the most killing zombies and then the final boss is the stork kind of feel.
Yeah.
Like that pulled me right in.
Yeah. No, not a coincidence. I mean, I was playing all the Resident Evil remakes during COVID, and yeah, I love that franchise.
I like that you talked a bit about the chainsaw camera, because my next question was going to be about working in found footage. You know, it is a style. It is here to stay. It is also sort of like any other mode, zombie movies, you know, trauma, horror, if you want to call it, found footage. All of these things have sort of like ebbs and flows, and it's our responsibility a little bit down the line to go back and say, here's the ones that stand the test of time. Here's maybe the ones that don't. So, you know, how did you prepare to shoot something entirely in a first person perspective? Were there other films that you were looking at or referencing? Were there ideas that you'd always had in your back pocket where you're like, the moment somebody gives me a found footage film, I'm doing all this stuff right away?
I thought of it less, I suppose, as found footage and more like the video game aesthetic, more first person shooter
Yeah.
than found footage. Now, obviously, it is found footage. There's a camera on a guy's shoulder and there's body cams, but that gives you the first person shooter perspective. Video games don't really explain where the camera is or why the camera is in those positions, but that's how I kind of thought about it a little bit more. And that's why, like, it feels a little bit more like you have the guide character in a video game that's come with me. No, and you kind of lose his dialogue because he's leading you up ahead and you turn around the corner. So we kind of thought about it like that. And really, the only movies that, I mean, Hardcore Henry is a great example of that. So that was a big reference for us and how to capture. So it wasn't so much like the horror found footage that we know, the Blair Witches and the Paranormal Activities and the all the great ones, and those are the two big ones, of course. But it was more about the video game aesthetic. So, like, what those cameras would be. Yeah, I mean, we knew that we needed to have a camera that one of the characters was carrying, and that's, you know, it worked out because for video game lore, it's usually you're the rookie, so that you need to be taught the world that you're entering and the rules and all that stuff, and you're not really necessarily doing as much fighting as you are witnessing stuff going on. And then the other camera angles were the body cams on the police, which those were really difficult. I mean, from a technical standpoint, to figure out how to do that, they are actually like a DJI, not a GoPro literally, but DJI, an action camera that are mounted onto the chest of the actors. But we knew that if the other cameras saw them mounted to the chest of the actors, we didn't want it to look like GoPros, that these cops were not wearing GoPros, they were wearing body cams. But the actual Axon body cams that we see in the police body cam footage that goes viral whenever, you know, horrible things happen, that stuff doesn't really look good enough. So they had to 3D print a housing to go over the action cameras so that you could actually shoot them and it looked like police body cam mounts. But those things were 3D printed and the plastic is pretty fragile. So they were falling off and breaking left and right. And the magnet, they were held onto the wardrobe by magnets. So then you have to figure out, okay, if it goes over a vest, does it mount to the vest? What if the cop has it? One of them had a tie. Does it go over the tie? And it's all these silly hurdles. And then just where does it get mounted? Because the only way that you can monitor those cameras was from an iPad. And I wasn't really able to watch the iPad plus the main camera monitor. So for the most part, those action cameras and the body cam angles were kind of just afterthought and bonus. We knew we might use some, but we just would swap in between takes. We would just take a camera and put it on a different actor and let them run through the scene, and we get what we get. And I'm so thankful we did, because my favorite stuff of the stork is from the body cams in the attic, and so much of the action I love from that angle, just because the way the muzzle flashes and the way that everything would distort on those cameras. Chainsaw camera was also very difficult to figure out where that actually goes, and surprisingly, nobody, maybe they thought it and just didn't mention it to me, but I've never had anyone say like there is no justification for why there's a camera on the chainsaw, because it's not the camera was mounted to the saw. It's not actually the body camera that is seeing his movement because it's fixed with the camera or with the chainsaw. That was a whole thing. That rig was, we had to figure out how to arm the camera off of the chainsaw. And so a long way of saying is like really it just comes back to like wanting to capture the experience of playing a video game, a horror video game specifically. Yes, like Resident Evil or Dead Space were some of the ones that I had been playing most recently. And then the camera angles were just, you know, an extension of that.
Yeah, and I think found footage, it is a subgenre based on rules. So it might be annoying, all the stuff that you guys had to deal with, with cameras falling off and having to house it with like the like doohickeys to make it look like the body cam. But there are critics out there that I do know, friend of the show, Rob Hunter, and he's such a found footage fan, but he's also a self-proclaimed found footage snob. So it's like he's the guy out there being like, well, I see the camera in there and like it's not a body cam and I see this or that. So you go that extra mile, but you keep that authenticity, you keep that going. And I think there's a little leeway given for a chainsaw camera because fuck that. That's just cool.
Yeah, I would definitely not say I'm a found footage snob. And I think there's a time and a place for maximum authenticity for that genre. Like, uh, it's just that with store cops hunting, I was just like, this has got to be fun. And if it's gonna be fun, then there's a certain amount of rules that I just don't really care about. And I don't think that people who this is being made for will really like care about. But there would be other ideas within found footage that, yeah, you do not want to see a camera. You do need to have justification for where that camera is and why. I mean, the biggest thing that's the silliest to me is just like, who is editing these things in the end? And and we got some flack because I wanted to put score in ours. And I was just like, yeah, because you take the music out and it's just like, it needs music. We're already intercutting 100 shots. Someone's editing this thing, so they could have put
Yeah.
music in there too. But I don't know. There's a time and a place. You got to know your audience. You got to know what you're making, and then figure out how much you're going to double down on the authenticity or not.
Before Monocle takes us, I'm going to shout out for the billionth time one of my favorite examples of who is editing and why is there a score. There's a movie on Shudder called Therapy, and it is a found footage slasher film where half of it is the found footage slasher, but the other half is the cops looking over the footage. And so you actually see the guy in the editing booth and why he's editing it. He tells you why he's doing it because he's like, I trimmed all the fat out. What do you mean? We only need to see what we need to see. And then like the detective goes over and goes like, why is there a score? He's like, I don't know. It's boring without a score. So like it was so funny that they would actually pay attention and do that. So I like it's no matter how you do it, there's no right or wrong. But I really, if y'all are sticklers for the rules, I would say go catch Therapy.
I do have one more question for you, Jordan, before we go and talk about Rawhead Rex. And that is, ThanksKilling came out. This is this year, 2025, 17 years since your first feature film was released. And a lot, because the narrative of a lot of the work that you've done is you've managed to squeeze as much blood from an orange as you possibly can. I'm curious if you find that you have a lot of young filmmakers coming up to you now and being like, how do I do this? How do I turn my passions, my obsessions with the filmmaking process into something that I can just go out and shoot? Are you kind of teetering on the verge of like elder statesmen within the horror industry now?
I don't feel like it, honestly. And no, I don't have. I mean, truthfully, I'm not. I really don't frequent conventions. So, I mean, other than the VHS screenings, like I've just been holed up working on stuff. So I'm not, I guess, out and about enough to be running into people that would come up to me like that. Every now and then, yeah, there will be people who will wanna who reach out through whatever social media or email, and they'll want to talk, but it's not super frequent. No, honestly. I mean, I think a lot of people. I think it's tricky because it's, to make a feature film for $3,500 and to get for it to be released, like it's harder, I think, than people think. You know what I mean? Like that you don't. I think a lot of people just kind of feel like, oh, well, I can just slap that together. And it's like, yeah, but it takes, yes, you can make something on the weekends with your friends, but it takes a long time to put it together and to go through the process and to create all the deliverables that you need and find distribution and all that stuff. So no, I certainly wish that I had an outlet to help people with more. But no, I don't feel like necessarily um I guess in a way I don't feel like I've given back as much as that I probably can. Uh so ask me questions, I suppose, of young filmmakers. I'm here to help.
Yeah, if this is the start of that, I hope it is, because once again, I will admit that like I use your shorts when I talk to people about, shorts can come and go with the way people perceive them. Certain film fans will be like, "Oh, it's a short film. I don't have to pay attention to it." And I'm like, "No, fuck off." Like when you look at what someone like, again, a Trachtenberg, a Downey, like what y'all are doing with your shorts and how you're standing out from the crowd, I'm like, it this is fucking great cinema. We can't just like discount it because it's short. So if you are someone who is thinking about making a short and has questions, I would absolutely, as long as you're okay with it, say go to Mr. Jordan Downey for questions.
I'm happy to help because I'll never forget. Like I don't know I did not know anybody in the film industry. I just was a guy who literally grew up on a farm in Ohio who loved monsters and wanted to make movies. I didn't care about Hollywood or Los Angeles. I would have gone wherever to do that. So anytime there's somebody who I feel like is coming, I understand what it's like to have nothing and to just want something and to work hard at it and to build things with your bare hands. So yes, I'm always happy to help with anybody.
Well, we're gonna put a pin in that conversation, and we are going to talk about speaking of practical effects and lots of lore and monster movies. It's time for our discussion on Rawhead Rex. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Irish horror. Okay, welcome back. So this week on the podcast, we're talking about the 1986 film Rawhead Rex. If you haven't seen it before, brief synopsis for you. Howard Hallenbach is a man of a singular academic pursuit. He wants to visit and write about each of the pre-Christian religious sites in the country of Ireland. So when he drags his family to a rural township to photograph a nearby church, everyone thinks this is just the final stop before some well-deserved city time in Dublin. But this is no ordinary religious site. This is the final resting place of Rawhead Rex, a demonic presence that rises from the grave to terrorize car parks everywhere. Adapted for the screen by Clive Barker himself and based on his own short story, Rawhead Rex is a far cry from the Irish horror films you may know today. That's the film. It's available in a couple of different places. You can absolutely go out and stream it. Now would be a really good time to do that. But, as always, when we talk and we invite somebody on the show, some people really, really struggle with the notion of like, how do I find a film that fits our admittedly entirely arbitrary criteria? And some folks are like, immediately, exactly, I know the film I want to talk about. I feel like you fell in the latter category a bit more, Jordan. So I'm curious what it is about Rawhead Rex that made you want to bring it on.
I don't remember when I first saw Rawhead Rex. I definitely that the VHS cover actually isn't like that impressive. Like it's kind of just him standing in the like arch of a church. But the title Rawhead Rex is so unique and strange, and I think if you Google it, you'll see the image. But I miss the days when video jackets would just have like a single image. Now it's a collage, everything's photoshopped, but it used to just be a single image, and on the back it's like a red cover, and on the back it's just Rawhead Rex, like the creature puppet with his face going up to bite somebody else. And I'm sure that image was the thing that got me to rent it whenever I first saw that movie. But I loved it from the start. Choosing it for this, I think honestly I gravitated towards a few other things, but they had more than 10 reviews. And I was surprised that this one did not. And I don't know what got me to think of it other than just I had been eyeing to buy the 4K restoration. So I was going through a list of like, oh, what are the movies that I've been wanting to revisit that I really liked and haven't seen in a while? And this was one of them. But I love Rawhead Rex is flawed, as we'll get into, and as most people who see it would probably agree. But there's no denying, even that now that I've revisited it a few times before talking with you guys, like there's a charm to it that I just love. And I remember loving the first time I saw it. I actually found it to be frightening probably the way that he charges across that trailer park, and it's so blatantly shown on camera, I think in a weird way is almost more shocking than a typical monster movie that would hide him. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about with Rawhead Rex, but this is just one of those fun monster movies that has stuck with me since for my entire movie watching life.
It felt like a nice connection moment when we're talking about not being afraid of the practical, right? Leaning into the
Hmm.
practical, being willing to take a risk on stuff that you don't know if it's going to work until you're going to see it on camera. I like that you brought up the fact that they show Rawhead. This is not a, there's no killer POV in this. There's no like monster in the shadows for most of it. It's just a lot of close-ups of what is obviously prosthetics and a mask that they put together for this creature. But it's interesting to hear you say that because I don't think I quite made that connection that part of what I was responding to while the movie's going on, he's just in it constantly. That thing is like 50% Rawhead Rex, which is such a huge departure from a lot of horror that we watch.
Yeah, and what I love about it too, that goes hand in hand with that, is that it's daylight horror. You don't see a ton of that, and I've always drawn to the sequences in the Friday the 13th films when he's stalking at the camp and it's in broad daylight, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe the best daylight horror film ever. And Rawhead Rex, the first time you see him is he's popping out of the field and it's broad daylight, it's stormy skies, but it's light, it's lit. And that first scene where he's lurking in the barn and he kills the husband and he goes breaking into the house, there was something really shocking, I think, probably at the time that I had seen Rawhead Rex. I'm guessing I was well versed enough in horror films so that the daylight scenes and the showing of this monster stood out against everything else I was seeing because they were hiding. They were, like you said, there's the killer's POV lurking in the woods. We don't see him till the third act, and that Rawhead Rex doesn't play by any of those rules. It's broad daylight, charging at you, close ups, like right from the start, and and it obviously does not hold up. The animatronic is not. It's like I did all this research about how they made it, and it is an animatronic from the waist up that is doing most of those close-ups, and it doesn't look great, but it looks awesome, if that makes any sense.
Well, because it's one of those they don't make them like they used to, and that is such a novelty now. Where I was talking on another podcast about the 2000s era of horror, and the 13 Ghosts remake is a remake I fucking champion to hell because I love that movie. I will sit with that for so long. But I tried to think about why it was so hated upon its release and now has found a second life. And I think that's because in 2001 when it came out, or that around that time, all a bunch of movies looked like that. And it was this 2000s new metal kind of horror film. The editing was really quick cutting. Like people were kind of calling the practical effects not that fun. And I don't know why, because I always loved it. But now when you look back on it, like it's had a resurgence in the late 2020s, late 2010s, early 2020s. And I think that's because we don't see anything like it now. Like you don't get a $40 million Dark Castle fucking horror movie that gives you so much production value. You get the $5 million Blumhouse movie or the $10 million A24 movie that's more character driven. So in context of Rawhead Rex and what
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about, when I still watch it now and I look at that creature, is there a scene where he's running across the car park and it looks like the animatronic's gonna fall off of whoever's carrying it? Yeah, 100%. That exists. But is it still awesome because we don't get shit like that anymore? Yeah, like it's Pumpkinhead. It's all these things where
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the big creature. I want it to be present for most of the time. I come to terms with the fact that it's not going to look great 100% of the time, but that's because they're giving us something that, to what you were saying before, don't be afraid to just give the people the creature. Don't be afraid to give the people things that no one else is doing. Well, that's Rawhead Rex and all its fucking Frankenstein fucking chop shop glory.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like you said, there is that shot, and I specifically remember that. It's him running across, and you can see the upper half like teetering a little bit. But there still is something about, also, I think that specific moment stuck with me. And I've referenced it a bunch over the years in other scripts and things, because monsters don't usually just like run right head first at the victim, and there's something off-putting and eerie about. That's what I love about Rawhead Rex, is that even though it is so kind of janky in the execution of the creature and in some of the actual, filmmaking, there is something that is like eerie about it. And yeah, you see that thing charging and it's teetering and it's going to fall apart, but again, it's the decision to still shoot that and leave it in there is so strange, and that's what makes it unique and such a fun watch. And it's filled with moments like that. I mean, the whole movie is just loaded with odd things.
We were emailing a little bit back and forth. You and Donato were, before we recorded, and you were talking a little bit about, the graphic novel, Steve Niles' graphic novel, which I haven't read. But this, the author of 30 Days of Night and a bunch of other horror specific stuff. Obviously part of the reception of this film, for better or for worse, is the fact that Clive Barker wasn't a huge fan. Seems to maybe have found a little bit of peace with it over the years, but initially was not like, hugely supportive of the movie. So I think that kind of plays back a little bit to the source material too. Are you a fan of the original Books of Blood short story? Are you a fan of the graphic novel expansion adaptation? Are these things that play into your love of Rawhead, or is it just about this movie?
No, well, so my order of, I guess, introduction to Rawhead was movie first, then graphic novel, like fairly recent, like within the past decade. And then I had never actually read the short story. I knew that the graphic novel was pretty faithful in the literature. Obviously, the art wasn't in the Books of Blood. But before this, and I listened to the audio tape of Books of Blood, and I had not actually ever read or the original short story. They're completely different. I feel like there's really not. I mean, there's some basic similarities between the movie and the book. The book and the graphic novel are absolutely brutal. I mean, I don't know if you guys, if you've read it or how familiar you are, but Rawhead Rex the movie is PG compared to what he wrote. It is like grotesquely aroused, like everything about the writing, which is awesome in its own way. I mean, I love the book in the graphic novel, and the brutality and the meanness towards children, and it's repulsive, it's shocking, and the movie kind of captures some of that at times, and you can tell like it kind of is struggling, like Clive Barker and the director are struggling with that censorship and where they draw that line, because they still have the famous scene that is with Rawhead giving a piss baptism by urine, as it's described in the book. And but there are other moments that are in the book that are just like, oh my god, like not even close to what they captured on screen. So yeah, I've seen it all now at this point in time, but over the years at different times in my life.
Yeah, and for anyone listening who doesn't know why Barker hates this, I did pull up one of his quotes because it is about that. He talks about the slasher film, and he talks about like a monster movie essentially being about, as he says it, large males run around terrorizing women. Now, the gag only works if you understand the subtext. Otherwise, it's about a dumb monster running around. So this is Barker now saying why he did not like Rawhead Rex, and he said, "I couldn't get them to understand that the whole movie had to smell of sex. When this thing appeared, you had to think it was a dick, but they didn't get the joke. And it was the joke. Or sorry, it was a joke, and that was the point." So, like, not only did it lose the brutality, but it sounds like it lost the satirical nature of what Barker was trying to do. And, like, that's why he got so mad. Like, he wanted Rawhead Rex to be a gigantic monster dick.
I love
he
him.
did
I
not
love
get
him
that.
so much.
Like,
I love Clive Barker so much.
He and that in the graphic novel, that is pretty much how they draw him. It's a really strange design. I don't know if you could imagine, like, if this movie ever got remade, if you could actually pull off half of what he wrote, certainly would be worth trying. Um, but yes, exactly. It's the kind of thing that you can tell too. It's got like I mean, what's interesting is because he wrote the screenplay for this, so he himself. I don't know if it. What I think from listening to one of the commentaries, books of Clive Barker was not the Clive Barker that we know of at the time of production on Rawhead Rex. I don't think the short story had even been published yet when they got the financing and started shooting it. I could be wrong there, So I don't know if it was just a job for him, if it was just a way to try and hopefully elevate his career, get exposure or whatnot. But you can probably feel that like even him as the writer of the film was struggling with tr- making something that fit in 1980s slasher mode, and there's teenagers in the woods, and because those are the elements that are not in the book and that are the things that kind of stand out in a very like cliche way, I suppose, for that era especially.
I'm talking about, you know, taboos and things you're not supposed to do in a horror film. I want to go back to you talking about the fact that they do a couple of things. Yes, there's the piss baptism, which is obviously just, you know, a good time for everybody involved. But when Donato and I were chatting with a few folks about doing this film, you know, one of the things that we heard over and over again was like, yes, they kill a kid, 5 stars. Like, love that movie because they're willing to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how you feel, you know, looking back on this when, you know, horror has become more transgressive, but also in some ways a little bit safer than maybe it has been at any point in the last 30 years. We talked when we had David Desmalchin on here about like, do you kill the dog? Do you kill the kid? Are you willing to kind of go there? So that's become my new favorite question to ask filmmakers. Do you kill the kid? Do you kill the dog? If you were doing this, would you be willing to like murder provided you could get away with it?
I think if you're gonna do, like Clive Barker, the book is in a way that's what makes it powerful is those really bold things, and oddly enough, it's like when you do more of it, it feels more acceptable than if you just have one gratuitous instance of something of an animal or a child or you know any kind of death or rape or anything that's you know that's taboo. If you do less of it, it feels like it stands out in a way that feels unnecessarily, like, guess, shoehorned in. And I'm not really a fan of that in general. I'm not really a fan of mean spirited stuff like the wave of all torture, you know, horror stuff. I never was really drawn to it. Yeah, I'd kind of like look at some of the special effects and stuff, but I don't. As much as I love practical stuff, I just don't want to see like amputations and that level of like violence of carving people up. It doesn't that doesn't do it for me. Oddly enough, a monster biting the head off of a kid doesn't affect me in the same way. And so I don't know. I think it's hard to just put a blanket statement over this is good or this is bad. I think that in movies in general, I'm able to separate that from real life. I don't watch a movie or play a video game and then if it's got a bunch of guns and then go out and want to shoot somebody. It just I don't make that connection. There's two separate worlds. So I don't mind seeing some of that stuff in movies. I think it would certainly be pretty shocking to see that nowadays in like a theatrical release, especially because everything is so safe. Everyone's so worried about offending somebody or doing something that's gonna lead to the wrong kind of viral experience online and whatnot. But yeah, I don't. It's really just like story dependent. I think I guess is kind of a cop out way of saying like I'm all for it if it feels like you can pull off if it's needed for the story and if you're doing it with a tone that doesn't feel. I just don't want to feel like the filmmaker's a bad person. I guess if that you know what I mean. I just want to know that the people that are making that it's for entertainment, even if it is gruesome entertainment, and not that they are kind of sadistic. In
It's
some movies, you feel that way a little bit more.
the movie's for us, it's not for them. An
Yeah,
important distinction, but yeah, one that you know when you watch a horror film and you're like, oh, you're just doing this for you, then you're no longer in dialogue with them. I totally get that.
yeah,
Yeah, because I think I mean, for me, like the animal death thing is one of the easiest cop outs that I see all the time. To what you're saying about, I don't think saying you have to serve the story is a cop out because I see so many instances where it does not serve the story, but it's shoehorned in. Exactly what you said. Like, are we killing the cat or the dog because you're too lazy to find a better way to represent your psychopath? Or are you the movie The Pool that has a dog in it, and it is
no,
one of
no,
the most crushingly brutal deaths ever, but it's so that the man survives in the most insane way possible. Like, are you justifying it? Is it a terrible thing? Are those things going hand in hand? Yeah, it's that current conversation that's going to be going forever. How many boundaries do we push? How do we do it? But at the end of the day, it's not about pushing boundaries. It's about telling a story. So if you're telling the story correctly, you might be pushing boundaries, but that's not how we think of it. If you're just one of those exploitation filmmakers who knows nothing but how am I going to piss somebody off, I don't really care about that anymore. I'm not in college, or I'm not in high school anymore. Like, I'm not watching movies for dares anymore.
Well, I have
Right.
to follow up with that then, Donato, for both of you, and Jordan, we'll start with you. I mean, there's going to be a cross section of horror fans that just watch this because of like the murder, right? Because of the practical effects of like blood and
Hmm.
gore. Donato is by far the most enthusiastic goop horror fan that I know. But through your expert practical eyes, Jordan, how do you view some of the kills in here? Because there's a lot of surface level mutilation. There's a lot of like scraping and stabbing. And I feel like there's a lot here that somebody that's like, I don't care about Clive Barker. I don't care about religious horror. I just want like bodies, bodies, bodies. There's a lot there for that type of horror fan too.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really. Yeah, there is. I think if you're looking for that kind of, 80s monster violence, you're going to get that out of Rawhead Rex. And certainly, yeah, I mean, the killing, the scene at the car when the dad sees his son get attacked is really well done. It's honestly like probably the most effective scene in the whole movie, and it's actually very similar to the book. That is one of the things that is almost shot for shot the way that it was described. Um, but it's really effective and really well done. I think it's more. I mean, look, for instance, the book literally describes as Rawhead eats the child that the child throws up down the throat of Rawhead as he's being fed into his mouth head first. So it's like, okay, we're gonna kill the kid, and then we're going to actually have the kid vomit down the monster's throat. Like it goes to a degree that's just like insane. But I think that yes, if you're a Goopy fan, you get multiple severed heads. You get claw marks. You get people being ripped up. It's not like the best gore ever, but you're gonna get what you want out of it. I think. Yeah.
It's ticking all the boxes of a Midnighter, and I think this is one of the areas where it does struggle a bit too, where we're talking about, okay, like, why does the one girl have to have her top ripped off when she's taken out? Like, that to me is just what you said before. I forget it was Monocle or Jordan, but Rawhead Rex is being made to be a certain type of midnight movie, and we have to abide by certain rules that were of the time. And so, like, those parts exist, but the parts that exist outside of it, like, I think really do get away from being just, exploitative for exploitative reasons. I love the scene where, the horn dog is trying to have sex with his girlfriend in the woods, and it just ends so poorly for him, as it should. But
Hmm.
that beheading is like, it's my favorite. Like, is it falling into tropes of if you try to have sex you die? Yeah, of course it is. But is it still doing it in a way that tears his head off and leaves his like mangled corpse behind to be found later? Oh yeah, no, it's good. That stuff's good.
It's that's the one where she goes running back and she's like, "Help, help!" And she's like, turns around and she's holding his severed hand. I don't know if I've seen that gag anywhere else. Like, okay, you didn't recognize the weight had changed dramatically about like what you were tugging. Um, those little cheesy gags like that, I think it's the same thing that probably Clive Barker hates that then also does make it a fun midnight movie.
I want to ask Monocle though, because this is an Irish horror film that leans into religious folklore very heavily, and the way that we differ is I'm the midnight guy, you're the fucking lore-driven religious guy. So, did this hit what you needed for an Irish horror film steeped in lore?
Well, it's no hole in the ground. I will put it that way. But I'm gonna Aikido that energy because I was gonna ask Jordan a little bit about the lore piece, but I'll answer your question, Donna, which is that it is like as soon as I finished watching the film, because I watched this for the first time for this podcast, I immediately went on to the Austin Public Library and added the Book of Blood to my library queue because I'm not a as much a practical guy as Donato, so I don't respond to the things that both of you have kind of talked about in here. But what really caught my attention is I love it anytime a filmmaker, it's the prophecy, it's all this other stuff, right? When they refer to the idea of pre-Christ religious stuff, that there is this creature that has been living in the ground in Ireland since before Christ walked the earth. As a lapsed and self-loathing Catholic, I love, 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 love when things talk about the pagan elements to religious history. So my Aikido,
Hmm.
my transfer of energy to you on that, Jordan, is as somebody who likes world building and likes lore, how do you respond to the stuff that they're doing in there, especially near the end where they're painting this picture of demons and monsters that walked the earth in biblical times? Because that feels like I wanted that thread to be just like so much more tugged on. It feels like it is both a really big and interesting idea and also money left on the table a little bit.
I agree. The book does a much better job of setting that up and paying that off, and at least giving you a little bit more backstory. There really isn't like a protagonist to the book. There is a person who defeats Rawhead, but it isn't necessarily somebody who you're seeing the story unfold through their eyes. It really is much more like through Rawhead's eyes. And there's these amazing cutaway moments in the book where you just cut to Rawhead healing his wounds up in the hills, like looking at a meteor shower. And I love that because it, even though he is the villain, he is the monster, it kind of, it, like you said, with paganism, it ties him to nature. It ties him into it reminds you that like this is an ancient, more than an animal, it is a conscious God, and who has animal capabilities with teeth and strength and claws and all that stuff. But it ties him to the woods in this land that has been there for centuries. And it just so happens that he was trapped and he came back alive. And now there's car parks and there's technology and there's people that they are the invaders to his land. And he's is not ancient in just a old dumb dinosaur. It's in a very hyper intelligent religious kind of way. So the book does a great job of that, and I love all of that lore in general. The movie doesn't really capture much of that. It's much more monster slasher. That yeah, he's alive. Stone got knocked over. He's awakened and he's going on a killing spree. And oh yeah, we need to conceal him again. So here's the stone. Let's bring a stone back into it. But I love the idea of the stained glass. Like there's those great shots in the movie of the light coming through the stained
Yeah.
glass depiction of Rawhead and just this demon that's under a rock. I struggle sometimes with like I think with a lot of like, religious horror is just like I suppose the simplicity of how something can be defeated by oh yeah, a cross or a ring or like just these very simple items that defeat the monster. I'm not saying that it needs to be something more complicated or a bigger, heftier, bulkier weapon. It's just that sometimes like it can be, I guess, like a an easy out to just be like, oh yeah, sure, we'll just take care of the monster. Just read this little scripture and monster goes away. Um, but yeah, so the book does a really good job of capturing that lore and more so than the movie does. But it does hint on that world building and I think like you probably why you went to the library immediately is because you can feel that there is like something more going on and like why is he there and why is he buried and how did he get there and who is this creature and
Yeah.
that is the stuff that makes it more unique than another an animal monster movie or a just some other kind of a monster that has way less backstory.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched Rawhead Rex. I will admit, while it's very clear, he does not kill the pregnant woman, he does not kill
Hmm.
multiple women. But then you just get to that last shot of Howard when finally the totem is used and Rawhead is defeated, and he just looks at the camera and is like, "Oh, that's right, women." And
I
it's
know.
like, oh, that's how we're just gonna wrap this up. That's why we're gonna tell this entire story of Rawhead not being able to like, obviously there is something maternal or something going on here, but it is boiled down to, all right, women, and like the movie just ends, and I was like, oh shit, okay, so that's what we're doing.
It's it's so I know, and it's the way it's handled is so like okay, so you have a male protagonist who basically just like forces his wife to do whatever he wants to do for the entire movie. Yeah, we're gonna drive here, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. No, we're just he's like pulled his family to Ireland for like 3 months or so while he works on his book and everyone else like puts their lives on pause. And then in the end, he's like, "Oh yeah, my wife just did it." But then the camera comes back to him, but I'm still the hero, and movie over. It's like it's so offensive in a way, to women, that is laughable in its all of its 80s cheese. Uh, but yeah, it's one of those. I mean, that's also different. That's a departure from the book too. So it's, I don't know why they went that route.
It's actually funnier to hear that it's not in the book because it feels so mishandled in the movie in a way. And again, it's not bad in what it's doing. It's trying to say something. It just never gets there. Like, and I think that's why I think I like Rawhead better on a second time, because all that stuff I had fun with. The first time I watched Rawhead, it was very much me trying to piece things together, and it's very obvious, but it feels like pieces are missing. It feels like there are scenes on the cutting room floor that did not get in there, and what we got was the 80s Midnighter. Just cool, fun. But I think on that second watch, knowing what I was walking into and knowing all those little elements that made me kind of roll my eyes the first time, I actually chuckled at them this time. So I think that's the differentiation here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think not that it's the world that we're talking about in his backstory, but the Irish countryside in this case. I mean, the book was in England, but in this they shot in Ireland. Like, I've always been drawn to that look. American Werewolf in London, or just music videos, anything. Just like, I love that kind of terrain, and I think that it does. That's also what makes it really unique, because there just aren't a lot of monster slasher films that have that backdrop.
So the last question we normally ask our guests is, how does this film find its audience? I think Rawhead Rex is kind of okay there. I think, like you said, brand new 4K release, relatively new 4K release. It's got an audience. It's a curio, and it's well liked because it's a Clive Barker story. So here's my question for you then, Jordan. I always think of, when I think of directors angling for a film, I think of Josh Rubin being like, "Give me Darkman. I want to direct Darkman. Like, it's going to happen. I'll make it happen. I'll will it into existence." Should we get some sort of underground grassroots social media thing going for you to direct the Rawhead Rex remake? Should we start pressuring the Clive Barker estate? He's not dead, but the Clive Barker estate to turn the keys over to you?
Sure. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, if someone said, "Hey, here's a bag of cash, go make whatever you want to make." I don't know that Rawhead Rex would have been the first thing that came to mind, but at the same time, like, I have become genuinely really fond of the story and the lore of this character, and there is so much left to do with it,
Yeah.
that yeah, I mean, I would love to take a stab at this. I think it could absolutely be redone in a really, I think you just could not shy away from the vulgarity of what Clive Barker wrote. That's what is shocking about it. So yes, why not? I'll never say no to a cool opportunity like that. So yeah.
So my question, piggybacking off that, then, is like, I am the remake guy. I fucking love a good remake. And if someone did give you a lump of cash and said, "Hey, what do you want a Downey? Like, what movie do you want to take and give your spin on as a remake?" Like, what would be your first pick there?
It would be Critters.
It would.
Just be, yeah,
That's
yeah,
fair.
just because that's, I mean, even though it would be equally terrifying, because it is like, it's my favorite movie. It's the movie that made me interested in making movies. Um, I would much rather go down swinging with that, even if I royally screwed it up or whatever happened. But yeah, it'd be Critters, because that movie, it just means a lot to me. So that would be the one that I would, and that I do feel like you could still do something with.
Yeah.
There's a lot you could do.
Well, there you go. You heard it first on the Certified Forgotten podcast. Everybody is talking about Jordan Downey for the Rawhead Rex remake and the Critters remake. So, tell your friends, tell the producer, make it happen. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a really fun conversation, not just talking about, you and your history, but the perspective and the lore that you bring, talking about watching commentary tracks and revisiting books and stuff. I feel like if people walked away knowing how well you prepare for talking about one movie on a podcast, they might have a sense of the energy that you bring to making your own stuff. But for those who want to stay connected with you online, who want to know the projects that you've got in the pipeline and things that they can check out, work that you might be doing, I know you have a website. I know you have a jordan-downey.com, I believe. Are there other places where fans, movie lovers can stay connected with you?
I'm most active at this point in time. Instagram is what I use the most, so that's just at Jordan Downey. Um, yeah, send me a message, follow along there. Anything that I try to share little behind the scenes stories and images and things along the way, and respond to people as much as possible. So that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. And VHS Beyond, people should definitely sign up for Shudder and watch that ASAP, I'm thinking.
That is, yes, the Blu-ray comes out in February. So
Oh,
if you
nice.
are a physical media junkie, it's coming your way. And there's some cool bonus features on it. And but otherwise, yes, it's on Shudder. Right there is one of the banner things, and it is nominated for a Critics' Choice Award, believe it or not, which is awesome for horror. And thank you to you guys for being a part of that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I can't.
Donato.
I was gonna say I can't believe I'm gonna be sitting at the Critics' Choice this weekend and get to hear VHS Beyond, even nominated, whether you win or not. It's the funniest fucking thing ever. I love it.
I totally agree. It's amazing.
This is a great year for horror, slipping in the cracks of all the award stuff. I mean, we don't need to talk about how The Substance did yesterday, but cool stuff happened all around.
I know.
Donato, how do folks stay connected with you?
You can stay connected with me at Donatobomb, DonatoBomb, and that's going to be Blue Sky, Letterboxd, and Instagram, most TikTok if it doesn't get banned. And yeah, we're kicking off the new year, so we're just hitting the ground running. I got to start watching horror movies so I can make a top 10 at the end of this year. So I think I finished with 120 new release horror movies from last year, and that doesn't count all the festival watches. So yeah, I keep you all up to date.
I am both proud and horrified of you in equal measure. As for myself, you can follow me on Blue Sky. It's Monagle, bluesky.social. But do please, if you liked what you heard today, and how the fuck could you not, subscribe to the podcast, visit certifiedforgotten.com. We have a lot of really talented writers who put their heart and soul into making sure that movies like Rawhead Rex don't remain curios, that every movie out there has a champion, and somebody's going to write about a movie for us, and it's going to be the best, your new favorite film. So, whether it's this, whether it's something a bit more recent, certifiedforgotten.com, we've got you covered. Jordan, good luck at the Critics' Choice Awards, and best of luck on your next project. Wherever you're at in that process, if you're in the editing bay, whatever it's like, I hope the rest of the way is smooth for you.
I am editing as of today. So
awesome. Good luck, man.
Something new's coming. Thank you guys so much. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Donato, take us home.
Monster golden showers.